When I go off the wide gravel road, lit by the yellow glow of the park lights, onto a half-obscure path into the dense briar thicket, I feel it immediately. Nothing seems to have changed. The same sparsely maintained outskirts of the park, the same quiet late evening, yet it feels wrong. As I'm getting farther away from the row of lanterns and their golden rays falling through the green lace of maple crowns, it's becoming darker, and the briar desperately scrapes on my jeans and clings to my jacket. But I'm not a little kid anymore to be afraid of the boogeyman in the dark. Though, in those bushes, you could meet something really fear-worthy. Feeling the hairs on my scruff assume the standing position, I unbutton my holster, just in case. I really don't want to go. I can't even describe how much I don't want to. But I don't have a choice. If there is a new path into the shadow, I have to check how passable it is, how long can it last, and if some poor guy has not already gone to the place from where there is no return. Though sometimes, rarely, they do return. Or rather, something does. What they have become, what they have been turned into. Actually, you can find out most of what you need to know without going into the shadow. Almost everything, except for the main thing. The only way to find out if someone has traveled down a cursed path is to walk it yourself. On our side, it is the most ordinary path in the thickets. If you take it on a normal day, you'll simply cut the corner of the park to get to the next crossroads. But if you step on this path at an evil hour, then with each step you will get further and further away from the usual ordinary world, with streetcars, nightcaps, and loud party-goers. However, I once saw a streetcar in the shadow. It passed by me at a wild speed, but absolutely silently, and completely ignoring the absence of even a hint of rails or contact wire. And I was grateful for that speed, because what I quickly saw inside it in a few seconds was enough to give me nightmares for days. So I must follow the path to its end. Then, most likely, I'll need to overcome my fear and continue. I never understood why I was chosen by fate for this. I lived the regular decent life just like everybody else, was making my career as a reporter, had a girlfriend, and did some sports. Just an ordinary, unremarkable person. I never even thought that I could become what I am now. The hunter. I spent most of my life not even believing in the existence of those creatures I have to fight now. I didn't believe in anything. To be honest, I still don't. Sometimes I get the feeling that everything that happens to me is not real, that it's a delusion, a hallucination, and in the real world I'm lying somewhere in a mental facility in the fetal position, while the doctor regularly checks me and writes in my chart something like, "There are no changes in the state of the patient. Total catatonia, no progress could be expected." Or whatever they write. Or maybe I'm lying in the grave. A hardcore atheist turned into a demon hunter. Fate, it seems, has a truly twisted sense of humor. My depressive thoughts are interrupted by the instinct that is supposed to keep me alive. The atmosphere around me gradually changed as I moved along the cursed path. Now, it finally turns from unpleasant to creepy. The park lights are gone. The bushes gradually become more sparse, But the feeling of something evil, prickly, even stabbing, digging into my legs remains. A typical thing for such paths. My gaze is searching the ground, though I have no desire to find what I'm looking for. As usual, Shadow doesn't give a damn about my hopes. A chain of footprints is glowing with the bluish light through the perpetual twilight. I sigh. So, Father Aris was right after all. It's not a new path, and there is a reason for me being here. I will have to go to the shadow because here they are, the footsteps of a man who unknowingly has traveled a path that leads to something worse than death. And now I must follow that trail to its end. I don't know what awaits me there, but I'm sure it's nothing good. Of course, it's not my first time doing this. I'm well equipped and morally prepared for many things. But the shadow is what it is, and its unexpected horrors seem to have no end. At this thought, my right hand instinctively reaches to the open holster, and I start to walk more carefully and smoothly, my movements becoming sharper and more deliberate. I am not a passerby who has accidentally wandered into a land of horror. I am a hunter. Even so, staying on the trail is safer, as the even line of footprints proves, so I follow it, step by step. But if it starts to loop, or even worse, to break, that's when no smoothness in movements and accuracy of step will help. After a few minutes, I stop and scratch the back of my head. The habit of adjusting to any footsteps, whether it's the sprawling, confident gait of the athlete or unsheaming heels of a mannerly lady, is ingrained in my subcortex. But now, for some reason, I lose my way at every third step. I gotta figure this out. Looking around gives no clues. The usual grayish landscape of shadows, typical for almost all such paths, especially at their start. Soon everything becomes clear. I berate myself for not paying attention. I am an experienced hunter, and it's inexcusable to overlook such obvious things. It was two people who left those footprints. And, surprisingly enough, they were also trying to follow the trail. It was just that sometimes they didn't quite succeed, and the prints were a little blurred in length. That happens when people don't have the same stride length, and one has to adjust to the other. In my case, the person with the short stride had to step noticeably wider than usual, trying not to lose the footprints of his comrade. Many footprints were noticeably stretched out at the heel side. I stand for a moment pondering. This is very strange. How would random people know about the need to tread footprints here? For that matter, no one but hunters even knows of the shadow's existence. But there is only a handful of us. Everyone knows each other. If two hunters were to come to town, Father Aris would let me know, and they'd be sure to meet me. A matter of courtesy. That's how we do things here. And anyway, who knows each shadow better than the local hunter? No, they can't be hunters. First, we are good at adjusting to other people's footprints and don't miss every third step like these two. Second, there are no visible stop points. Every hunter knows that you have to stop and look around from time to time. The shadow is constantly changing, and you must stay frosty so that things that wander in it don't sneak up on you unnoticed. I don't get it. They're walking one behind the other, which means they know that's how it's supposed to be done. And somehow they're miraculously sticking to a safe trail, but at the same time, they just keep pushing forward as if they're going for groceries. Who are you? I feel a sudden chill to my right and immediately get worried. I know this place. Know it way too well. And the worst part is that the trail also turns to the right, where it shouldn't. Today, this place looked like a shabby three-story brick building with scratched, soiled walls. The windows are either shattered or wide open on crooked, rusted hinges, and instead of a door, there is a shapeless gap in the brickwork. The gabled metal roof is rusted through in places and had sagged, barely clinging to three chimneys that are also starting to crumble. You look at this dilapidated structure and understand right away that it has stood here totally forgotten and abandoned for who knows how many years. The only danger it poses comes from the ceilings, which, even if they are still holding up by some miracle, could collapse on your head at any moment. I wish it was so. Of course, the shadow is an ever-changing and uncertain substance. You can never be sure that everything you saw and feared just yesterday will remain in its dangerous place today, though you can still count on a certain degree of relative stability, or, if you like, inertia in the shadow. It's like when I follow someone's footsteps. They're still there, and the whole area is more or less familiar, but something always changes. Where yesterday there was a big tree, today there is a withered flower bed. Where yesterday there was a bridge over the river, today there is a half-sunken barge in the muddy channel. Where yesterday you had to pass the pile of burned cars, today for some reason there is a subway station with bricked doors. The main thing that stays the same is the danger level of all these ephemera. If yesterday's cars smelt of death a mile away, this feeling will remain in today's subway and tomorrow's broken phone booth, although they may even slightly change their location. Often, such danger points constantly migrate through the shadow, each time waiting for you in a different place. 500 meters further north, for example. It's not a problem for a hunter. That's what makes us hunters. We can feel such things. For us, the shadow has its own taste or smell. Call it whatever you like. We feel, and sometimes we even see it. Where and what in the shadow is dangerous, and where and what is not. And we're able to enter the shadow at will, of course. The half-rotten wreck to my right was the most dangerous place in the part of the shadow available to me. Of course, if you go too far. Actually, no one knows what happens if you go too far into the shadow. Simply because no one has ever come back from there to tell you. This is another thing that distinguishes hunters from ordinary people. We always know when to stop. We feel where the point of no return is. Father Aris said once that the shadow is changing people, whether they are a hunter or just a random poor guy, and the further you go, the faster the changes. But that's just a guess, because no one has ever returned from the depth of the shadow, not even as altered. But from places like the brick building, they did. Or rather, something came back. Indistinguishable at first glance from the person whose body and memories it had taken. But there is nothing human about what would come back. Only pure, untainted evil. Fun fact, this place is always on the right side. The last time I found it a good kilometer farther into the shadow, it looked like a summer cafe, with the windows boarded up with plywood, grayed and shattered from old age. But the smell of it is always the same: the scent of madness and something scarier than death. I shake my head. I'm getting a little emotional. Of course, hunters are human beings like everyone else. Well, almost. We have emotions too, and a hell of a lot of doubts and fear. But there is time and place for everything. In the shadow, you can't afford such a luxury as emotions. I scrutinize the chain of footprints beneath my feet again. It feels like an unknown couple stopped here for some time. I've already decided they are young. It's a couple, a young man and a woman. Why? The gait of both of them is light and springy. That defines the age. One step is noticeably shorter than the other, so they don't always hit the trail. And the second person's foot is noticeably smaller. Definitely a woman. Strange. It can't be that they can sense the shadow too. But if they don't, what does all of this mean? Okay, the two of them are walking well. Sort of. But to the hunter, they're like elephants in a china shop. Twice already they had come too close to dangerous places. Not like the brick barracks, of course, but it was better to avoid them. I did, as any hunter would. And they don't know how to walk in pairs properly. Sometimes they are breaking the pace and walk almost hand in hand. In the shadow, if you walk in pairs, you must keep a distance of 5 or 6 paces. So if anything happens, one of you would have a chance to escape. Speaking of stopping in dangerous places, I need to keep moving. I quickly look around, with particular attention to the right, and set off again along the chain of footprints. By the distance between them, I can see that their steps have become more brisk and confident. They stood here for a while, talked things over, made a decision, and what? What decision could they make? What could two such confident non-hunters be doing here anyway? I automatically adopt their manner, though I shouldn't, and quicken my steps. The barracks stay behind, and I'm feeling better. There is no new or old danger that I can sense nearby now. I reach an intersection half cluttered by a pile of rusty scrap metal in which two crashed cars are barely recognizable. It's suspicious, of course. I don't remember such a thing since my last visit to Shadow. But my gut feeling is silent. Everything is quiet. A chain of tracks wraps around the obstacle on the left, at the greatest possible distance from both the cars and the shriveled concrete fence, bristling with crooked rebar on the broken corner. Well done this time. In the shadow, you have to stick to open spaces. And then I see him. He's lying on what used to be the trunk of one of the wrecked cars, his head tilted back into a rusty hole, so I can't see his face. Skinny legs and stained, faded jeans barely touch the ground. One arm is tucked awkwardly under his back, and his body is oddly twisted. You can only lie in such position if you're dead. Definitively and irrevocably dead. The worst part is that I know who it is. But why does my sixth sense remain silent? I pull out my gun, cock it, and began to slowly approach so that I can see the face of whoever is lying on the rusty car. A step, another step, one more, and more. Shadow is a strange place. Hunters call it shadow for lack of a better word. And that's ironic because there is no natural shadow here, nor is there light in the usual sense of the word. The sky is replaced here by a pale shroud, and everything around is seen in the same gray color, which eats up both any darkness and any light. You can crawl into a deep cave or turn on the most powerful flashlight. Nothing will change. A half tone. Shadow. Even though his head, tilted at an unnaturally sharp angle, is almost completely hidden in the rusty mouth of the trunk, I can see the face well enough. Or rather, what's left of it. Max's left eye has been gone for a long time. I knocked it out when defending wounded Father Ares from my altered partner at the place that's always on the right. Unfortunately, the charmed bullet barely caught him, which wasn't enough to stop him forever. But Father Ares and I managed to escape. The wounds from charmed and consecrated weapons do not regenerate well in the altered. Max remained one-eyed. But the sharp iron that pierced his other eye and emerged from the back of his head was something else. Somebody also cut his throat. I didn't see it from afar because of the strange pose. Wow, that really went overboard. For an altered, even so powerful like Max, an enchanted weapon to the head is always enough. A slit throat, on the other hand, might not work. So they went for double safety. I took a closer look at the iron piece. A blessed crowbar? That's some brutal style, to say less. Who would ever think of consecrating a rusty crowbar in a church, or having some wandering Buddhist monk or shaman mutter chants over it? A real hunter is always equipped with proper weapon, and it doesn't make any sense if it's not a real hunter. Anyway, they destroyed Max, and it was good. Max was killed by the house on the right. I mean the real Max, the hunter, my friend and partner. Several people went missing in the shadow in the row a couple of years ago, but we couldn't find anything or anyone. The footprints always seemed to vanish into thin air. And then I was attacked by one of them at the very entrance to the shadow. An altered, a 7-year-old boy. Even altered, he was still behaving like a child. He didn't realize or ignore the fact that the altered were weaker at the edges of the shadow. I couldn't bring myself to shoot the kid, a former kid, in the head. But a simple hit to the thigh immobilized him, and then I pulled him out of the shadow. It took me a few days to recover. Father Ares had told me that if you pulled an altered out of the shadow, he would decompose and crumble to dust in 5 or 6 minutes. He was little wrong, or maybe it just depends on the age of the altered. The boy decayed in about 45 seconds. I still have nightmares sometimes. After that, the 3 of us entered the shadow. Me, Max, and Father Ares. Father Ares is very old, even by the standards of hunters, and we live much longer than normal people. But his feeling for the shadow and its entities is amazing. He led us to a house on the right that we hadn't stumbled upon before. But the house didn't smell as dangerous then, so Max went in to see what was going on down there. He came out 5 minutes later and started shooting at once. Father Ares was the first to smell the altered. He recoiled, pushing me away at the same time. The first 3 bullets passed between us. The 4th hit Father Ares in the shoulder. In the half a second that Max was deciding who to kill first, I managed to fire a few shots of my own. So that's how the demon that killed Max's soul became one-eyed. Moreover, the hunters spilled blood, bound him, so he had to gather his strength for a long time before each exit from the house on the right. But when he went out, and now some weirdos have finished him off with a rusty crowbar. Slit his throat, too. I wouldn't be surprised if it was with scissors. God works in mysterious ways. I grin and look again at the chain of footprints. They lead away from the intersection to the right, to an alley of black deforested trees covered in strange rope-like stuff. The weirdos have moved down the middle of the sidewalk again. Good for them. If they knew what those trees could do to a man when the darkness storm began in the shadow. Today was not the season, but it was better to be safe. Father Ares is always reproaching me if I mention God. I often argue with him on theological topics, although somewhere in the deepest part of my soul, I want him to be correct, not me. I'm an atheist, even though I'm a hunter. Or is that the reason for my atheism? I don't know. I once asked Father Ares how he could believe in a merciful God after all he had seen in the shadow. I still remember his answer, word by word. Boy, do I have a choice? If such pure evil can exist, I just have to believe that there is also a higher good that balances it out. Otherwise, the only way out is a rope around the neck. That's it. It's hard to argue with that. Something changes in the pattern of the footprints, and I start to worry. What's wrong? Another dozen meters between the black trees, and I begin to think there's only one person left. But looking closer, I realize it's not so. It's just that leader has slowed down, which means that the distance between the steps had become shorter, and it's easier for the girl, I'm pretty sure now it's a girl, to follow. Why? If they were hunters, I'd say they, like me, were alerted to something. But what? I'm not sensing anything yet. Besides, they're not hunters. The chain of footprints, meanwhile, turns right again at the next intersection and leads straight to a black hole with broken steps, the entrance to an underground passage. God, no! I'm even saying it out loud, breaking Father Ares's precepts again. Why did they go in there? The underground doesn't smell particularly dangerous. Not right now, anyway. But even on the surface, nothing is permanent in the shadow. Hunters navigate here purely on instinct. Underground, however, it's impossible to predict where such an ordinary-looking underground passage might lead you. There's almost no chance that if you go down there, you will ever come to the surface. Or you might come out somewhere. Or maybe it won't be you anymore. But they did go down. Jesus, I think, or say again, and head down the stairs. The shadow's strange omnipresent half-light, of course, extends to its dungeons. Something is cracking under my feet. Some dry light threads hang from above, and I must pull them away from my face with my hand. Not good. It's better not to touch anything in the shadow. But the chain of footprints keeps getting farther and farther away. Strange. It's not dark, but I can't see where the tunnel goes. One thing is clear. There is no exit, just as I thought. My gut is still silent, and I continue cautiously following the steps of those weirdos. So far, they've been fortunate. Hopefully, I'll be lucky too. It's a good thing the tunnel is mostly straight. You can see what's far ahead, but you don't have to worry about some creepy thing jumping at you from around the corner. There don't seem to be any side holes. If my gut is not lying, I don't have to worry extra about it. I'm worried enough already. That's too bad. The hunter can't afford to ponder about random stuff while in the shadow. But it's easy to be said. Thoughts overwhelm me, and I only try to keep up a small part of my consciousness, my inner watchdog, so that it will react when my gut starts to scream, danger, death. Thoughts are messing around, swarming like the undead fish in my mind. In the last 2 years, hunters have been disappearing one by one, all over the world. They enter the shadow and never return. Once in a while, they were seen as altered, but more often than not, they just disappeared. Gone inside the shadow from where they once came from. It's a truth we hunters are afraid to even remember. We all came from the shadow. Each of us was supposed to die at some point, or actually died. We don't know the answer to that question. Father Aris, for example, was shot in 1920 in Germany. I died in a car crash. Japan's best hunter, Aruga, in the hunter community we call him Admiral, was the last commander of the Yamato battleship and went down with it. We all died at some point, and then came out of the shadow. That's probably why we live for so long. We age, but very slowly. Well, I've been a hunter for just a little over a dozen years, but Father Aris looks about 60 now. 100 years ago, he was 43, and so it is with everyone. We hardly ever feel sick. No hunter has ever died of the flu or even cancer. We can break an arm or leg, but it will heal quickly, a week at the most. To us, to die is to go into the shadow and never return. Except that's been happening a lot lately. The Admiral once said that his teacher, a former Buddhist monk Tadao, used to say, "It doesn't matter how long we live. We cannot change the shadow because we are its spawn. We can only hope to save someone. And for us, it's too late." The Admiral had a long argument with Father Aris, who disagreed. But I remembered Father Aris saying almost word to word the same thing to me. None of us knows why consecrated or enchanted weapons kill and maim the altered. It does not matter how this weapon is consecrated, as long as it is done by a priest or a priestess of any religion, and as long as he does it sincerely. Anything can be consecrated, but still works best. Most prefer firearms with consecrated bullets, but many carry something else. For example, the Admiral always walks in the shadow with his sword. Or, rather, he used to walk. He didn't return from the shadow 4 months ago. It's a shame there are so few true priests and monks among the hunters. But it's hard to keep your faith pure when you have already died once and then returned from the shadow. The most worrying thing is that after Max's incident, we learned that unlike the regular altered, former hunters still retain the ability to use consecrated weapons. What are we? The tunnel began to curve gradually to the right. There's still a lot of garbage underfoot, but those nasty little things don't cling to my face anymore. A chain of footprints goes down the center of the tunnel. They walk like seasoned hunters, not too fast, not too slow, not approaching the walls and not stopping. How far have I traveled? A kilometer at least. Underground passage to nowhere. Also, the entrances to the shadow began to disappear. Several entrances to each shadow open on a schedule, known only to the shadows themselves. No one can just walk into the shadow, not even a hunter. It's just that we can sense these entrances, and we can always find them. And those who can't sense them, the shadow finds them on its own. So, several old shadows have become completely inaccessible. They've either sealed themselves up or disappeared. It would seem that we can only rejoice, but the unknown usually scares people. And when this unknown is associated with the shadow, Father Ares went to Helsinki to meet with other experienced hunters to discuss what was going on. I stayed behind to take care of things. Be careful out there, Father Ares told me at the seaport. I nodded. Being careful out there is a thing that never seems to work for me. Suddenly, I realize that something had changed dramatically, and I freeze. The chain of footprints curves at a right angle and goes into a break in the side wall of the tunnel. It's a sick-looking gaping hole, like a maw, with rusty fangs of bent rebar and shattered tile teeth. My gut rears its head and says, "Watch out." Nothing terrible yet, but something is wrong. I have no way out, though. As long as my gut is not wailing and the trail is not lost, I must follow the people in the shadow, while they're still human. Whether I am human is the next question. Why on earth did that strange couple decide to go into this hellmouth? When normal people find themselves in the shadow, they first feel uncomfortable, then become very anxious, and then scared out of their wits. What average person, scared half to death, would carefully walk half a kilometer through a tunnel to nowhere and then climb into a scary dark hole in the wall? Even a hunter would need a very good reason to do that. Like me right now. I go into a narrow hole and scramble through the roots sticking out from everywhere, until I fall through another hole onto the floor of a small room and look around. If there were smells in shadow, it would have smelled of dust and decay. The floor, the walls covered with wallpaper that now turned to fragile blank scraps, and the earthy ceiling with bits of plaster that had miraculously not collapsed, everything looked half rotten and dilapidated. There are even a few pale mushroom sprouts in the corners. In the opposite wall of the room, there is a wooden door with peeling paint. Footsteps lead beyond it. I step toward it, and then I feel a disturbed instinct somewhere deep inside me, scratching with sharp claws. Please, not now. Please. I realize there is no turning back here. I can't just turn around and walk away, leaving the strange couple to their fate. Especially since if I'm turned back, I'm unlikely to return to where I came from. I grasp the doorknob, swing the door open, and step through the threshold. "Well, hello, Hunter," a terribly familiar voice says, and the door slams shut behind me. Sometimes I call myself an exorcist, either as a joke or out of desperation. But it's not really true. We're not exorcists. We don't perform any rituals to exorcise demons or devils. Hell, most of us don't even believe in God. Father Ares and Brother Tadao don't count. We're just people, are we? Who can step into the shadow and smell those who have done so unwillingly. Those who can't get out of there without us. We can also kill the altered, whoever they really are. You have no idea how much we've been waiting for you, Admiral Aruga says, stepping out from behind me. His left hand rests carelessly on the katana's hilt in the scabbard on his belt. They are all here. The white-haired Onjay of Olomouc, the stern, impenetrable-faced Icelander Lars, the grinning Ngawa from Rwanda, freckled Belgian Linda with a long aristocratic family name I never cared to remember. They stand along the walls of the spacious basement, each with his favorite weapon at the ready, and stare at me with bottomless black eyes without whites. All 26 hunters that have gone missing in the last 3 years. My gut starts to wail on the highest internal note, and I realize where I am. The place on the right. Aruga stands directly across me. I can reach and intercept the katana's hilt and draw my pistol with the other hand. Dreams. What do they always say in the books and movies? If I'm going to die now, I'll take at least one of you with me. Well, that's not going to work for me. They won't let me die, and I won't be able to take anyone anywhere. 26 hunters. 26 altered, with hell black eyes without a glimmer of life or hope. I realize it's about to be 27. Can I ask you one last question? I ask, looking straight into Aruga's face. He looks exactly the same as when alive, except for the eyes. Why do you call it the last? He answers. But I understand. Ask, we're in no hurry. The couple, the guy and the girl, I say. The ones who killed Max, were they here? It's a question that's been bugging me because there is no sign of them. Aruga faintly twitches the corner of his mouth. For him, it means immense amazement. There were 2 other hunters with you, he asks. Strong and experienced enough to handle Max? I don't want to give him any extra information, so I shrug. Aruga twitches the corner of his mouth once more. It doesn't matter, he says. You'll tell me soon enough anyway. And he takes my hands in his. No one knows how one becomes altered. Except for the altered, of course. People just enter the shadow only to come back no longer human. We don't even know what they are. Bodies possessed by demons, damned souls, the living dead, or vampire minions. Sounds ridiculous, but any version could be valid. And I'm about to find out which one. Aruga stares intently into my face, and the space between us distorts. At first, it looks like a haze, as if from rising currents of hot air, but then I notice thin gray streams of threads coming out of his bottomless eyes and slowly reaching toward me. I realize I should fight back somehow, dodge, but the air around me has turned into a thick jelly, and any movement I make gets stuck in it. I roll my eyes downward and see smoky threads reaching out to me from all the altered, enveloping me from head to toe and gradually turning into a dense, opaque cocoon. The funny thing is, I can't feel anything at all. Like those poor souls in the old sci-fi novel who were consumed by the half-living slimy stuff from the sewers. Only when cocoon begins to envelop my head do the basement and the crowd of altered gradually fade out of sight behind the gray shroud. I should have been careful out here, as Father Aris told me. Right after this thought, the gray veil turns into an impenetrable darkness, blacker than death, to be instantly replaced by a monstrous explosion of light, sound, and whatnot hitting me like the Big Bang. I told you he could take it, a voice says. I don't know who it is or what it means. If I'm altered now, why am I still thinking of myself as myself? Or is that the way it's supposed to be? You still shouldn't have risked like that, the other voice replies. It's vastly different, but I don't understand how. I don't even remember yet how this understanding thing works. What if he'd been stuck halfway through that scum? I don't know, the first voice answers. How could that be? I want to intervene in this conversation, but I don't know where to do it. Wait, no. When to do it? Or, that's it. Now I remember. I don't know how to do it. How? I say. How? I told you, says the first voice. See? Something is happening to me. I'm trying to figure out what it is and whether I should resist it. It feels like there is no threat. It feels like the neurons in my brain have been turned off and are now turning on one per second. Something happening again. I tense up and then finally the right neuron turns on and the news comes through. My shoulder is being shaken. It hurts. I can't figure out exactly where it hurts, but it hurts a lot. It feels like a bubble of concentrated pain was sitting in the shoulder I was being shaken on, and it burst from the shaking, spreading throughout my body. That's good. So, I'm probably still alive. Or not altered, if you prefer. Get up, the first voice says. We have to go. It's a man's voice. I know now what it is. A man. I say. Why? The danger! I can barely move my tongue, but I'm understood. A little, replies the second voice, which differs from the first. Female? The altered are finished, but we must get out of the shadow before it's too late. Try to get up. The altered are finished. All of them. I remember other sensations besides pain and sound. I try to move my legs, though I can barely remember where they should be. It hurts. So, my legs are still there. Some thought is persistently swarming in my brain, scratching my consciousness like prickly insects. Something must be done, something very important, without which I can't. Eyes! The shadow's dead gray light suddenly hit my eyes with magnesium flash, but I keep my eyelids open. I want to see the end of the altered. Standing up would be nice too, of course. Hello. There are my voices. A man and a woman, both in their early 30s. Whoa, I thought they were younger. They are dressed casually, jeans, sneakers, sweatshirts. The man has a backpack behind his back. The woman has a small gym bag over her shoulder. Both have blonde hair. The man has a short, sporty haircut, and the woman's hair is gathered in a small braid and pinned in a bundle at the back of her head. The kind of people you'd find on any street in any city. Not hunters, I can feel it, and certainly not altered. What the hell are they doing here? The man and the woman smile, and I realize I've said it out loud. Let's hit the road, the man says. We can't stay here. Can't stay here. Where is that? I look around. I don't know what I expect. Piles of corpses, guts on the walls, and pools of blood. But I see nothing. Only the walls look melted, and there is a big crater on the floor. I, of course, am standing right in the middle of this crater. We take a shortcut to the surface, up the mossy stone steps from the basement to the ground floor, down the junk-strewn passage to another short staircase, and through the crumbling maw of the front door out of the house on the right. After the basement, Shadow seems as friendly and cozy as the lawn at Grandma's cottage. But just like there, you have to go so as not to miss the train home. Nikolai and Adele married when he was 23 and she was 22. A year later, they had a son. And after another 7 years, their son accidentally wandered into the shadow and did not return. Into my shadow, in my town. That was the same boy I burned by pulling him out of the shadow. Something is going on in my throat, and eventually I say something totally different from what was hanging on the tip of my tongue. How did you finish those? In the basement. Nikolai stops. He goes first, me in the middle, and Adele trailing our little squad. Turns around and shrugs guiltily. Just a stick of dynamite with a short fuse. We opened the door, threw it in, and closed it. Sorry, we had to take a risk. But we were sure that in the process of altering you'd be protected, and thee would be vulnerable. I nod my head, but I don't understand. Dynamite? Really? How could they know who would be protected and who would be vulnerable? What the hell is all this stuff about the vulnerability? You can't hurt a crowd of altered like this by the dynamite. Not even by an atomic bomb. My saviors are not hunters. I can feel it. But who are they? And why would they do that? More importantly, how do they even know about the shadow, the hunters, and the altered? We're moving again. Nikolai's obviously in a hurry. Why? Another mystery. You can't rush in the shadow. It doesn't forgive any rush. After the shadow took our son, we almost lost our minds, Adele says into my back. We thought he'd been kidnapped, but the police couldn't find anything. Nothing at all, not a single clue. Eventually, we couldn't bear it anymore and decided to end our lives. So they are the hunters. But why hasn't anyone heard of them? And why can't I still feel them? We wanted to take sleeping pills, Adele says. Nikolai walks silently ahead, but I can see his back stiffen. Enough to fall asleep and not wake up. We had everything ready, but stopped by the church on the last day, just saying goodbye to the city. That was the church my grandmother took me to as a kid. There was this priest, Nikolai says. When he spoke to us, we thought he was crazy. But he knew. He knew everything, and he told us what to do. Father Aris, Adele says into my back. In the early days of my career as a hunter, I used to read medieval treatises on exorcisms, cleansing, and the like. I found nothing particularly useful in them, though sometimes they were more interesting to read than most elaborate fantasy. Father Ares also laughed at this hobby of mine, saying that it would be better for me to learn to shoot well, and sincerely offer prayers, than to swim in the maze of scholasticism and demonology. But some of the things I had read then stuck in my memory, and now they came to my mind just in time. Or too late, depending on how you look at it. At all times, fighting evil had been considered a God-pleasing endeavor. Holy, you might say. And if it was blessed by a priest of any kind, who makes any sharp piece of iron a consecrated instrument for the battle against evil? I never thought I'd meet two true saints in the shadow. Holy dynamite, my ass. Only a short walk remained to get out of the shadow. It's less dangerous here, and we're relaxing a bit. Especially since all the altered in this shadow have already been destroyed. Somehow, I'm pretty sure of that. Every shadow has a place like this house, Adele says. It's hard. If you destroy it along with its spawn, the shadow weakens and slams shut forever. Some of the altered were reborn in other shadows, but we closed one shadow after another, until the last one left, this one. We round the crumbling stall and emerge onto the narrow gravel path leading to the exit of the dusky park, to the exit from the shadow. As always, the gray veil of the border begins to shimmer, shining through its murky nature with the juicy colors of the living world. Nikolai suddenly stops and turns around, blocking my way. To my left is a thicket of bushes, and to the right, a deep ditch with suspicious slurry at the bottom. I can't walk around him. The shadow can only be closed by destroying the last of its spawn at the entrance, Nikolai says. There was no gathering of hunters in Helsinki. Father Ares instead flew to Dresden and closed the shadow himself, after he told us what exactly had happened to our boy. But we don't blame you. You could not do otherwise. It's nothing personal, Adele says behind my back. You're a good guy. We even liked you and you helped us with the altered. But you're the spawn of this shadow. We have to see this through. Forgive me, as we have forgiven you. The last thing I feel is a cold circle pressed against the back of my head. The muzzle of the 45. The shadow is no more.